When a racist man demanded a black woman be kicked off a flight, no one expected what happened next. She didn't argue or raise her voice. She made one phone call. By the time the plane landed, his life was in ruins, and justice had been served in a way that stunned everyone. What was in that call, and how did it change everything? Stay until the end to witness a moment of empowerment that turned racism on its head. The warm hum of an airplane cabin usually brought a sense of calm to passengers, but not this time. The air was tense, heavy with unspoken unease, as people shuffled to their seats. Among them was Angela Harris, a poised and confident black woman in her late 30s, dressed in a simple but elegant blazer and carrying a small organized bag. She was returning home after a long and emotionally draining work trip. Angela wasn't looking for trouble. She just wanted to sit in her assigned seat, take a breath, and finally relax. But trouble, it seemed, had found her. The murmurs began before Angela even placed her bag in the overhead compartment. A man, middle-aged, with a sharp scowl and an air of entitlement, was glaring at her from across the aisle. His body language spoke volumes, arms crossed, face flushed, and a muttered comment that was just loud enough to be heard. "She doesn't belong here." Angela's heart sank, but she refused to show it. She had heard those words in different forms her entire life. She took her seat, determined to stay calm. Her upbringing had taught her to pick her battles wisely, and today, she thought, might be one of those moments to let it slide. But the man wasn't done. He rose from his seat abruptly, marching down the aisle to find a flight attendant. Passengers watched, confused, as he waved his arms and raised his voice just enough to draw attention. "This is unacceptable," he exclaimed, pointing back toward Angela. "You need to move her, put her in another seat or off this plane altogether. I paid for a comfortable flight, and I won't have it ruined." The flight attendant, a young woman who looked caught between professionalism and panic, tried to reason with him. "Sir, I assure you, all passengers have been assigned their seats fairly," she said gently. But the man wasn't interested in fairness. "I don't care," he barked. "Do something about it, or I will." Angela sat frozen, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Each second stretched into an eternity. She could feel the heat rise in her face, but she kept her composure. Years of navigating similar encounters had taught her one thing: grace under pressure speaks louder than any outburst ever could. The flight attendant approached Angela with an apologetic look, whispering, "I'm so sorry about this. Is there anything we can do to make you more comfortable?" Angela gave a soft but firm response. "I'm fine right here. I have a ticket for this seat, and I'm not going anywhere." The words were calm, but inside, her emotions churned. How many times had she faced this type of situation? How many times had her mere presence been enough to incite such hostility? She thought of her parents, who had taught her to rise above, and her grandmother, whose quiet strength was legendary in their family. "Never let them see you flinch," her grandmother used to say. The man's voice grew louder, disrupting the once quiet cabin. "You're really going to let this happen? I want a manager, someone in charge." Passengers began shifting uncomfortably, some whispering, others stealing glances at Angela. A few looked sympathetic, but no one spoke up. It was as if the entire plane was waiting to see how this would unfold. Angela sat tall, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't need to fight with words. She had something far more powerful. Slowly, she reached for her phone, her fingers steady despite the storm swirling inside her. One call, she thought. That's all it would take. As her phone rang, Angela glanced around, meeting the eyes of a few passengers who quickly looked away. She wasn't calling for herself. She was calling for every person who had ever been made to feel small, to feel unwelcome, to feel like they didn't belong. And when the person on the other end of the line answered, her voice was calm but firm. "Hi, this is Angela Harris. I need your help." Angela's calm demeanor masked the fire building inside her as she spoke into the phone. The passengers nearby leaned in slightly, curious but trying not to seem obvious. The racist man, who had demanded her removal, still stood near the flight attendant, huffing with exaggerated impatience. He shot a glare toward Angela, as if daring her to do something. Yes, Angela continued into the phone, her voice steady but carrying a weight that demanded attention. I'm on flight 327, and there's been an incident. A man is creating a hostile environment. I need this addressed immediately. The person on the other end responded with urgency, and Angela's expression softened just slightly. Thank you, she said, before ending the call and placing her phone back in her bag. The racist man smirked, oblivious to what was coming. What, you calling your friends? That's not going to fix anything. You need to leave. Angela turned her gaze toward him for the first time, locking eyes with a look so unshakable that it silenced him for a moment. Her voice was calm, but carried a sharpness that cut through the chaos. You've said enough. For a moment, the cabin fell silent. The flight attendant stood frozen, unsure of what to do, while passengers whispered among themselves. Who was Angela calling? What could possibly happen now? Minutes passed like hours as the plane remained grounded, waiting for clearance to taxi. The man, now emboldened by the lack of immediate consequences, leaned toward the flight attendant and spat. See? She's just making a scene. People like her always do. Angela remained seated, composed, but her fingers gripped the armrest tightly. She wasn't rattled by his words. She'd heard worse. But she wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about her young nieces and nephews, her friends, her community. She was determined that this man would learn today that his hatred had no place in the world, much less on this flight. Then a voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. We've been informed of a situation in the cabin that requires immediate attention. Please remain in your seats as we address the matter. The cabin fell into a tense hush. The racist man shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering for the first time. Angela remained still, her expression calm but unreadable. Moments later, 2 uniformed airline officials entered the cabin. Their presence was commanding, their gazes scanning the rows until they settled on Angela and the man standing near her. One of the officials addressed Angela first. Ms. Harris, are you all right? Angela nodded slightly. Yes, thank you. The man, now visibly anxious, interjected. Finally, someone who can actually do something. I've been telling them this situation is unacceptable. You need to move her. But the official held up a hand, silencing him mid-rant. Sir, we're here because of your behavior. You've disrupted this flight and created an unsafe environment for the passengers and crew. We're asking you to leave the aircraft immediately. The man's jaw dropped, his face flushing a deep red. What? Me? You can't be serious. I'm not going anywhere. She's the one causing the problem. The official's tone hardened. Sir, this decision is final. Either you exit voluntarily, or we'll have to involve law enforcement. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers who had been quietly observing now watched with open curiosity, some even whispering words of approval. Angela didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her call had set the wheels in motion, and now justice was unfolding before everyone's eyes. The man began to protest louder, but the second official stepped forward, speaking firmly. Sir, we've reviewed the situation thoroughly. Your behavior has violated our policies, and you are no longer permitted to remain on this flight. Realizing he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the man finally threw his hands up in defeat. This is ridiculous, he muttered as he grabbed his bag. He turned to Angela one last time, his glare full of venom. You'll regret this. Angela didn't flinch. She met his gaze with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words. As the man was escorted off the plane, a small but audible ripple of applause broke out from the passengers. Angela didn't acknowledge it. She simply exhaled, the weight of the moment finally lifting. But this wasn't over. Angela knew this wasn't just about her, it was about sending a message. The call she had made wasn't just to airline officials. It was to someone who could ensure the man's actions would have consequences, far beyond being removed from a flight. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, Angela leaned back in her seat, her thoughts racing. This was only the beginning. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, the cabin settled into an uneasy calm. Passengers exchanged glances and murmurs, the events that had just unfolded still fresh in everyone's minds. For Angela, the confrontation was over, but her mind raced with what came next. She wasn't one to simply let things slide, not when it came to something as insidious as racism. Angela reached for her phone again. She hadn't just made a call to the airline officials. There had been a second call, one with far-reaching consequences. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the name, Mark Daniels, civil rights attorney. Earlier, in the heat of the confrontation, Angela had briefed him on the situation. Mark was not just a lawyer, but an advocate, a man who had fought countless cases of discrimination and injustice. Angela had explained everything, the man's outburst, his attempts to humiliate her, and the airline staff's initial hesitation to act. "Let me handle this," Mark had said with calm assurance. Now Angela typed a quick message. "Mark, the man has been removed from the flight. Let's discuss next steps when I land." With the message sent, Angela leaned back in her seat, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. But she couldn't stop thinking about the man's final words to her. "You'll regret this." Would she? Number Angela wasn't afraid of people like him anymore. Her life had taught her to face adversity head-on, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. She thought about her late mother, who had marched in protests decades ago, and her father, who often reminded her, "If you don't stand for yourself, you stand for nothing." The seatbelt sign dinged off, and a flight attendant approached Angela with a kind smile. "Ms. Harris, I want to apologize again for what you had to endure earlier. That behavior was unacceptable." Angela nodded politely. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." The attendant hesitated for a moment before adding, "I also want you to know that several passengers have already spoken up on your behalf. They were appalled by what happened. You're not alone in this." Angela offered a faint smile, her resolve only strengthening. "I appreciate that. But this isn't just about me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. To anyone." The attendant's eyes softened, and she nodded in agreement before walking away. Angela glanced out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. For now, the man was just a memory, but she knew his actions reflected a much larger issue. It wasn't enough for him to be removed from the flight. There had to be accountability. Unbeknownst to Angela, Mark Daniels had already started working. Sitting in his downtown office, he was reviewing Angela's detailed account of the incident while listening to a recorded voicemail she had sent him. His expression shifted from calm to steely focus as he heard the racist man's words. "She doesn't belong here. Move her off this plane." Mark leaned back in his chair, letting out a sharp exhale. "Not this time," he muttered to himself. His first call was to the airline's corporate headquarters. As a seasoned attorney, Mark knew the weight of public perception in cases like this. A major airline wouldn't want the PR disaster of being seen as complicit in racial discrimination. "Good afternoon," he began, speaking to the head of customer relations. "I'm calling regarding an incident on Flight 327 involving a discriminatory act against my client, Angela Harris." The tone on the other end of the line shifted immediately. "We've been made aware of the situation," the representative said cautiously. Mark didn't flinch. "Good. Then you'll understand why I'm requesting a formal investigation into your staff's initial response. While the man was eventually removed, there was a hesitation to act that sent a clear message. Racism can linger unchecked. That cannot happen." The representative's response was measured. "We take these matters seriously, Mr. Daniels. We'll launch an internal review immediately." But Mark wasn't done. "One more thing," he added. I want assurance that the man in question will be banned from all future flights with your airline. If you fail to act decisively, this will escalate." The representative paused, clearly weighing their options. "I'll make sure this reaches the highest levels of our leadership team." Mark ended the call and began drafting an official statement. He wasn't waiting for the airline to act. He was preparing to take the story public. Angela felt a mix of emotions as the plane began its descent. Relief, exhaustion, and a quiet determination swirled within her. She didn't want to be seen as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. As the plane touched down, her phone buzzed with a notification. "Mark Daniels spoke to the airline. They're launching an investigation. Let's make sure this sends a message." Angela's lips curved into a faint smile. She was ready for whatever came next. As Angela stepped off the plane, her feet hit the terminal floor with a sense of purpose. The confrontation was over, but the fight was far from finished. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced down to see a message from Mark Daniels. "The airline has agreed to investigate, but will ensure this gets the attention it deserves. Call me when you're ready." Angela tucked the phone into her bag and walked through the bustling airport, her mind racing with both frustration and resolve. She had been through too much in her life to let this man's actions slide, but this time felt different. This time, she wasn't alone. Waiting at the baggage claim was a reporter Angela recognized. She froze for a moment, unsure of how the story had spread so quickly. The reporter caught her eye and approached cautiously. "Ms. Harris, I'm sorry to bother you, but we've received word about an incident on your flight. Would you be willing to share your story?" Angela hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted her face splashed across headlines, but she knew that silence could mean allowing similar injustices to continue unchecked. She looked around, noticing a few passengers from her flight who were quietly watching her. Some gave her small, encouraging nods. Angela took a deep breath. "All right," she said, "but this isn't just about me. This is about what's right." Within hours, the video taken by a passenger during the flight began circulating online. The footage showed the man yelling at the flight attendant, his words dripping with entitlement. "Get her off this plane!" The clip captured Angela sitting quietly, her dignity unshaken despite the blatant hostility aimed at her. Comments poured in across social media. "How does this still happen in 2025? This is disgusting." Angela is the definition of grace under pressure. The airline better step up and take action. As the story gained traction, Angela received a call from Mark. His voice was calm but filled with purpose. "This is bigger than just one man, Angela. The world is watching now. We can use this moment to push for real accountability." Mark had already spoken to the airline's legal team, who confirmed that the man was banned from flying with them indefinitely. But that wasn't enough. Together, Angela and Mark drafted an open letter calling for airlines to implement stricter policies against harassment and discrimination. The letter also called for mandatory diversity training for all airline staff, ensuring they could handle such situations with greater urgency and fairness. The letter, shared on Angela's social media, quickly went viral. Thousands of people, many of whom had experienced similar incidents, shared their stories in the comments. A few days later, Angela sat in her living room, watching the news unfold on her TV. The airline's CEO appeared at a press conference, visibly uneasy. "We deeply regret the events that occurred on Flight 327, he said. "No passenger should ever feel unsafe or unwelcome on our flights. We've initiated new policies to prevent incidents like this and are grateful to Ms. Harris for bringing this to our attention." The apology was a step in the right direction, but Angela wasn't naive. She knew that real change required more than words. Still, seeing the public support and knowing her actions had sparked change filled her with a quiet pride. Meanwhile, the man who had caused the incident was dealing with fallout of his own. News outlets quickly identified him as a mid-level manager at a well-known corporation. Within days, his employer issued a statement. "We do not tolerate discriminatory behavior in our organization. Effective immediately, this individual is no longer employed with us." The man's actions had cost him more than a flight. It had cost him his career and reputation. While Angela took no pleasure in his downfall, she hoped it would serve as a lesson. Actions have consequences. Weeks later, Angela stood at a podium in front of a packed audience. Mark had invited her to speak at a conference on racial equality and justice in public spaces. Her story had become more than a viral moment. It had sparked conversations about how systemic racism seeps into everyday life. Angela took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem we've all seen too many times. But here's the thing. Change is possible. We just have to be willing to demand it." The audience erupted into applause. Angela smiled, her heart full. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for countless others.